Hello bearded bee people, welcome back to B&K for another episode of our beekeeping crash course. Today is an important episode. We're going to talk about maintaining a Queenright hive. And what I mean by that is maintaining a hive with an active laying queen inside it. I think most beginning beekeepers have some type of queen stress during their first couple of years, whether it's because you completely messed it up and hurt your queen, or you're just super worried about whether she's in there and doing what she should be doing, or maybe you lost your first queen to a swarm. Either way, there are some real key ideas to keep in mind to make sure that you always have a queen in your hive, or that you always have the ability to quickly rectify your Queenright status, or restore your Queenright status. So, let's get into it. First of all, the best way to see a colony die is to have a colony without a queen. And the problems aren't just the fact that they don't have the ability to create more workers. The problems are also the fact that without that queen mandibular pheromone, without that queen scent inside the hive, the bees go into a sort of evolutionary Hail Mary, and they try to spread their genetics in the last effort. And what that means is the worker bees inside the hive will begin to lay eggs. We call that laying workers, and that's a serious problem. That's a problem that's very difficult to rectify. So that happens after a couple weeks of a hive being queenless, and after the queen mandibular pheromone, the scent of that queen, has completely dissipated from the hive. Then, like I said, you'll start to see bunches of eggs in each cell because all of these workers say, oh no, we're going to die. We need to attempt to spread our genetics. And so they just do that, and it's such a difficult problem to rectify. So like I said, maintaining a Queenright hive is very essential, and at least keeping the laying workers at bay during your queenless portion is an essential thing to understand. So we'll cover all that here today. So the first piece of advice I have for you in terms of maintaining a Queenright colony is to give your queen space to lay. Make sure she constantly has empty cells to lay eggs in. Regardless of whether you're in the swarm portion of the year, which is around here like May and June, or you're in August or September, if that queen has absolutely no space to lay, you are at the risk of a cramped swarm being sent out. So definitely always make sure that she has empty cells somewhere in the brood area that she can access. In addition to that, especially if you're running single brood chambers, a good idea is to make sure that there's empty space above the brood area. And what I mean by that is if we had a queen, if this was our one single brood chamber and we had a queen excluder on top and another box here on top of this queen excluder that was a honey box, it's advantageous for me to make sure that there's empty space down here in this box, but also empty space right directly above this queen excluder. And the reason for that is when nectar starts to come in, it can come in really quickly and really heavily. And if that happens to a single brood chamber colony, they can clog all of the brood cells up with nectar in a matter of a day or so. So if they have that empty space right directly above the spot, then they're going to just bring it up there and make sure that their queen has empty space to lay because they understand the importance of that. So make sure she has empty space to lay in the brood area, and it's also a good idea to make sure that there's empty space right directly above it where they can store incoming nectar. Okay. Another piece of advice is to take swarm prevention measures before they happen. And we're going to talk about swarm control later on in this section of the, in a future video in this section of the crash course. But generally, you're going to want to not be reacting to swarms, but be proactive. So during the swarm portion of the year, May and June, it's a great idea to split your overwintered hives by moving the queen and some bees to a new location. This is a simulated swarm and will convince those bees that they have already swarmed. That is probably the best piece of advice I have for you in terms of maintaining a Queenright hive over the course of many years. So yeah, take swarm prevention measures before they happen if you can. And like I said, in future videos, we'll talk all about swarm control and swarm prevention. Next up is a really important rule, and that is to not automatically pull queen cells. I think most beginning beekeepers have that urge when they see a queen cell. They don't want their queen to be replaced. They don't want to lose bees to a swarm. And the first thing that comes to mind is, hey, they can't make a new queen if you don't have a queen cell, and then you pull it. Well, the problem with that is, in terms of swarm, it might have already happened, first of all. She might have already left. And second of all, even if she hasn't already left, just the fact that you pulled that doesn't mean she's not going to. So it's a good idea when you see swarm cells, or when you see queen cells, to use all of the context clues you have to try to figure out what those queen cells are for, whether they're for an emergency replacement, a supersedure, or a swarm, and then use that information to decide what to do. My general advice is, in an emergency situation, if it's early enough in the year, just let them continue to do it. If it's a supersedure situation, definitely let them continue to do it. And if it's a swarm situation and you have swarm cells, we'll talk more about that, but really quickly, what my idea would be is to go through the colony, try to find that queen, and to quickly do a swarm simulation split if she is still in there. If she's not still in there, then my advice to you would be to pull all the queen cells but 2 and leave those 2 nicest looking queen cells in that box. So if she's still in there, what you did was you simulated a swarm and convinced them that they've already done it. If she's not in there, what you did was you pulled all of the cells with which they would send out after swarms, but left them enough so that they can continue to make the queen that they need. So leave 2 in there, but pull all the rest of them. Okay, and then another thing that is really, really good to know, really good to be able to have the ability to figure out quickly, is the sign of a queenless hive. Now, obviously, not being able to find her is one piece of evidence, but queens can be very difficult to find. Even an experienced beekeeper can have a real problem finding queens because sometimes they just don't want to be seen. So I don't just use the inability to find her as a sign that she's not there. I also use the inability to find signs that she's been doing what she needs to do. So if you don't see eggs or young larvae, and you also can't find her, those are all good pieces of evidence when clumped together that you might have a queenless hive. In addition to that, generally bees are flightier. They're noisier, buzzier, angrier, and flightier. And what I mean by that is, if you pull out a central brood frame with a queen in the hive, the bees are calm, they move calmly across the frames, they're not buzzing off all over the place and creating a lot of noise. When they don't have a queen, the center of the brood area looks way crazier and busier and sounds louder. It takes a little bit of experience and some know-how to be able to figure that out just by the signs of them moving and the way they sound. But once again, that piece of evidence coupled together with these other pieces of evidence that I've talked about can be a good method of figuring out whether you have a queen or not. Okay, and then the next step to maintaining a Queenright hive, or at least maintaining the ability to restore your Queenright status, is to make sure that there are always queen mandibular pheromone in your hive and or brood pheromone. So these 2 pheromones serve largely the same purpose in this one respect, and that is to keep laying workers from happening. The QMP, the scent of the queen, along with the scent of the brood inside the hive that the queen has made, are enough to keep the worker bee's ovaries from developing. Now, without those pheromones inside the hive, those worker bees' ovaries do develop and they start to lay eggs, and that's a tough problem to rectify. So if you do have a queenless hive, one of the best things that you can do right off the bat before you order a queen or before you go call your mentor one of the best things that you can do is to give them a frame of brood from another hive if you have one. This is one of the main reasons why I always recommend people get 2 or 3 hives to start off with, because not only comparing against the two is a great learning tool, but also having the resources to fix problems amongst hives is a great tool. So if you have a queenless hive, my first piece of advice to you is to give them a frame of open brood, preferably containing eggs. So not only will that give brood pheromone to that hive to keep those laying workers at bay, but those eggs will give those bees the ability to start creating a queen cell. And when you get back into that hive after a couple of days, if they have started creating queen cells all over the place where you gave them eggs, then yeah, you were right. They didn't have a queen, and now they're on the process of creating one. You can either buy one or get one from a buddy, or let them continue that process of creating one. Or maybe they didn't create any queen cells, and you were wrong in your assumption, and they do have a queen. Either way, the addition of that frame of brood doesn't hurt. It helps to keep those laying workers at bay, and it helps to kind of finalize that idea of your queen status. Okay, so installing queens. The first thing to keep in mind when doing that is that queen mandibular pheromone. If the queen mandibular pheromone is still strong inside that hive, those bees think they still have a queen, and they are not likely to accept a new one. Even if that queen is really dead, or you moved her in a split or whatever, if the scent of her is still strong inside the hive, they're not likely to accept a new queen. So regardless of how or why you're installing one, make sure those bees realize they're queenless by leaving them queenless for at least 24 hours. You can give them that frame of brood if you're pretty sure they're queenless, and then give them 24 hours. That's not going to stop the process or hurt your ability to give them a queen, but definitely, regardless of how it is or why you're installing a queen, make sure they know they're queenless by leaving them queenless for 24 hours. So, after they're queenless for 24 hours, you have the ability to install a queen. Now, this is going to be the same regardless of how your queen left. So the process is essentially you need to put that queen cage in the center of the brood action. So the idea is you put the queen candy up so that if any worker bees fall in that cage, they don't fall to the entrance and block that queen's ability from getting out. So you put the queen candy up or horizontal. The way I install queens most often, and the way we sell queens, are in the JZBZ cages. And with those, you can place them just directly in. I'm going to go get one. Okay, so after they're queenless for 24 hours, you have the ability to now install your queen. They're likely to accept her. There are a couple different types of queen cages. There are wooden queen cages, and then there are the plastic JZBZ ones. These are the ones we use, and I think this is growing in popularity. So you're likely to see these, but you might see the wooden ones. Regardless, it's the same concept. You have a little caged area, and you have a hole that is plugged with candy. Now this one isn't plugged with candy because there's no queen in here, but if you purchased a queen from us, this is how it would look, and this would be plugged with candy. So you're going to want to either place the queen candy up so that if bees die, they don't fall to the entrance and block the queen's ability from leaving, or you can place the queen candy horizontally. And the cool thing about these cages is, and this is how I install them, you don't really need to remove the frames at all. You can just place it right there in between the frames as such. This will keep the ability to where if those attendants die, they're not going to clog the entrance. It's right there in the center of the brood activity, and you don't have to remove any frames. And so when you get back in 4 days later, you can just pull the cage out, make sure she's gone, push those frames back together, and you're good. So to recap, Let them realize they're queenless for 24 hours before installing your queen. When you do get your queen and they've been queenless for 24 hours, install the queen with the queen candy up or horizontally. And you install her by putting her in the center of the brood area, and you can either put her on a frame like this, or wedge it between the frames on the top bars. Either way, in the center of the brood area is fine. Okay, and then 4 days later, 4 days after installing that queen, you will want to get back in and make sure that they have eaten all the way through the queen candy. Once again, when you do install it, if you have a wooden cage, there might be a cork by plugging the queen candy end. Remove that cork, place it in the hive, wait 4 days, check to see that they've eaten through the queen candy and released the queen. If they have not eaten through the queen candy and released the queen, if you're very new to beekeeping, you can just put the queen back and give them another day or two to continue to do that. Or if you've got a little bit more confidence, you can run a nail through the queen candy to quicken up the process, or you can just open up the cage and let her walk right out. At that time, they've spent so much time together. They've spent 4 days together. The workers are well ready and willing to let her out and let her start her process, so they're not going to harm her. You do have to be mindful of the fact that you want to keep the entrance pointed down. This is not necessarily something I recommend for absolute beginning beekeepers. That's absolutely something you can do if they've not eaten through all of the candy after those 4 days. Okay, and then after that, when you do remove that queen cage after the 4 days, wait a week. Wait 10 days is even better, because after installing that new queen, any new chaos to the hive can kind of make the bees wrongly accuse the queen for causing a chaos. And that will cause supersedure cells, and that's just not what you want to have happen when you've got a brand new queen inside your hive. So give them a week or 10 days after removing that queen cage to just let them figure it out and let them do what they need to do. Then after that week or 10 days, you can get in to make sure that she's started to lay eggs and make sure that, everything is going as planned. But like I said, definitely don't get in every couple of days after installing that queen, because you're likely to see supersedure cells as a result of that. Okay, so installing queen cells. Queen cells are a lot cheaper. They're a little bit more difficult, but the process is essentially the same. You leave the bees queenless for 24 hours. In this, you would want to remove any similarly aged queen cells. So if your colony has any capped queen cells in the hive and you plan on installing a purchased queen cell, remove all those capped queen cells from here, because they are likely to reject that queen cell you give them and go with the one that they created. So yeah, remove all of those similarly aged queen cells. Make sure that they're queenless for a week, and install the cell in a cell protector in the middle of the brood area. And the way you do that is just by pushing the cell right into the wax. You just push the cell cup, not the wax of the cell, but push the plastic cell cup right into the wax of the frame in the center of the brood area. Place it back there and leave it. If you bought your queen cell from a reputable queen breeder, that cell is likely to emerge within the next day or two. So give it 3 days or so before getting back into that colony. When you do get back into that colony, just go directly back to that frame with the queen cell to make sure that she has emerged. Here I have a picture of a couple of queen cells that have recently emerged. There's nothing else that could have possibly happened with those. That is an absolute evidence that a queen walked out of those cells and was not destroyed. You can see that little trap door was removed from the bottom of the cell. If you see that, then you know she emerged as a virgin and everything went well, and close it back up and just leave her. Don't try to find the virgin queen. She's flighty when she's that young, and she's difficult to find because she's not quite bigger than the other bees yet. And then at that point, you will want to wait. Oh, here I have a picture of a virgin queen emerging from a cell, or having recently just emerged from a cell. And here's when cells go wrong. There's a bunch of dead cells that were ruined by the first emerging queen. But after you install your queen cell and you've checked to make sure that she did emerge, give her a couple of weeks to go out on a mating flight. It will take probably 2 weeks before she's back and has the ability to start laying eggs. So if you can wait 3 weeks, that's even better. But definitely wait at least 2 weeks before getting in and expecting to see eggs. So I think that is it for this portion. Like I said, you see some virgin queens and dead queen cells. And next up, we have swarm control, prevention and reaction. Just a lot of good information there, so I hope you tune in for that. Regardless, though, thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope it's warm and the bees are buzzing for you guys like they are here for me. Get out there and have some fun with them. See ya.